This right here is my desktop computer. Now, to be quite frank, I have not used this thing for a couple of months now. The Sapphires laptop I have after the recent updates to Fedora and Ubuntu now runs almost completely fine, and I do a lot of my DaVinci Resolve work on the M1 MacBook Air. So unfortunately, this thing has become a waste of space. That is, until today. Through one of my favorite applications, Proxmox, what we're going to be doing is setting up a Windows virtual machine and passing a GPU directly to that machine. And this is awesome because within that virtual machine, I will probably be able to get DaVinci Resolve running perfectly fine, as well as potentially setting it up for Steam Home Link and streaming in the future. And despite the length of this video, it's actually a pretty easy thing to do. It's all going to be thanks to this Reddit post right here, the ultimate beginner's guide for GPU pass-through. And this is a idiot-friendly tutorial, so it's going to be perfect for somebody like me. Now the guide is 3 years old, so there's going to be some minor tweaks and changes that we make throughout this video, primarily due to both the VM configuration and VM setup processes, but most of everything is the same. So jumping right into it, the very first thing we're going to want to do is get a USB just like this and flash the Proxmox ISO to it. The download link for Proxmox will be down below, and if you're on Linux, you could use like GNOME utility or the GNOME disk utility to restore the ISO to the USB, or if you're on Windows, you could use a tool like Etcher or Rufus. Now, once you do have a USB flashed, what you're going to want to do is dive into your BIOS to ensure that IOMMU is enabled. Now here real quick, there's going to be a couple things in the BIOS that we're going to want to change. The first one everybody's going to want to do, and that's going to be going over to Advanced, and then under AMD CBS, you're going to want to go down to NBIO, and then right here you're going to see IOMMU. You're going to want to make sure that that is enabled. No matter your hardware, no matter who you are going to need this enabled in your BIOS. Now the next one was a little specific to me and my Radeon 580. If I go over here to boot, I needed to disable CSM. This right here, need to disable that for me because I was getting a lot of error 43 in Device Manager within Windows even after getting the driver to install, because there is a bug sometimes within these Radeon graphics cards, but I will be leaving links in the description to some additional resources and stuff to help you out if you do run into some problems. And now that you made sure that is set properly, what you're going to want to do, plug your USB into your computer, and then set this as the boot priority, and it will take you to the Proxmox installation. When you're actually in the install, you just go install Proxmox and then wait for it to boot into the next screen. And then from here, you go through the EULA, agree to it, pick the hard drive you'd like to install it onto, go next. And then from here, pick your country and then change your time zone to what is proper for your location, go next. Give yourself a strong, complicated, and secure password. Under email, we're going to replace this with something that's actually valid. So from there, we could go next. The management interface is going to be the network card you're using. Under hostname, there's a lot of different things you could put, but for me, I'm going to go with proxmox.local. And then this right here is going to be your IP address that you're going to use to connect to later. We're just going to go next. Here, it's going to give you a rundown of just about everything. And then you click install. And then when the installation is successful, it's going to give you your next step, which is going to be connect to your IP address in the web browser with the port 8006. From there, we can go ahead and select a reboot. And then when we go ahead and actually reboot into Proxmox, it's not going to give us really a user interface. It's just going to give us this with the same information we just said. At this point, you can leave your machine on, unplug it from your monitor or whatever you use to install it, and head over to your web browser. All right, here we are in a fresh install of Proxmox, and this right here is the guide that we're going to be using. And I will note that this Proxmox installation is completely fresh, so there is no changes in either the volumes, configuration, or anything like that. So let's get started by going to Proxmox here and jumping into our shell. What we're going to do first is some GRUB configuration. So go ahead, paste this. It's nano etc default grub, hit enter into our grub config. Now the first thing we're going to do is go to grub cmd line linux default where it says quiet. And what we're going to do here is add an entry to enable IOMMU. And depending on your CPU, you're just going to name the CPU. So if you're running Intel, you would type Intel. If you're running AMD, type AMD. I'm AMD, so it's going to be AMD underscore IOMMU equals on. And again, you're going to want to make sure you do enable this in your BIOS. So Control O to output, exit this out. And now we're going to go ahead and reload our GRUB configuration. I will note, if you check out that guide on Reddit, there's some additional variables and whatnot if you're running into issues, but at least for my system, just that works completely fine. So let's go ahead and update GRUB. So next what we're going to do is add some modules. So instead of going to etc default GRUB, we're going to go to etc and modules. You'll see this file doesn't really contain anything except for some commented out lines. But what we're going to do is copy and paste the modules we want to add, including VirtIO, OIMMU, and PCI. So Control O to output that and Control X. And now what we're going to do is some IOMMU remapping with some echo commands here. So this right here is the first one. It's going to allow for unsafe interprets within the interprets configuration. So hit enter. And then our next one is going to be a KVM configuration echo command. So paste that on in and hit enter. Now from there, we're going to run a few more echo commands to blacklist some drivers. This one right here is the Radeon drivers. So blacklist Radeon. And what this is doing is making it so our actual Proxmox system isn't going to try to use our dedicated GPU. So that way we can pass it directly through to our virtual machine. And I'm only going to be using Radeon, so that's technically the only command I need to input. But I also have an NVIDIA GPU, and I might want to throw it in this machine eventually. So I'm going to blacklist all of the potential drivers here. So paste that on in and hit enter. And now what we're going to want to do is actually add the GPU we're going to add to our VFIO. That is simply our virtual function IO, which we're going to be using for pass-through. So to do this, let's first list all of our available devices so we can find the right vendor IDs. So you just type in that command there. If I go all the way to the top here, you can see it's ls PCI-V. Now I already know where mine is because this is like the 4th time I've done this. But right there, 5 o'clock basically, that's a VGA compatible controller. Advanced Micro Devices Incorporated, Radeon RTX, and this is actually a 580 card. Now make sure you pay close attention because, like, for example, this right here is an audio device right under that, which also says Radeon RX, but this is for the audio over HDMI. This right here is what I want to pay attention to, this 05:00. And with that, what we're going to do is type in ls PCI just like before, but this time we are going to do -N -S and then 0500 or whatever number it is that you need to use. Hit enter, and this is going to give us some vendor ID numbers right here. So what we're going to do is add this to our VFIO configuration. We're going to do this with a echo command. Now I already put in the right variables here. So these two numbers, this one ending in 67DF and this one ending in AAF0 are the vendor ID numbers that we want to use. So right here under IDs in this command, you could see this one ends in 67DF and this one ends in AAF0. And it's adding this ID to our etc mobprobe.d vfio.configuration. Hit enter, and there we go. So now we need to update that with this command right here and hit enter. And this one takes it like 10-15 seconds depending on your hardware. There we go. So now we just need to type in reset, hit enter, and now we're going to be starting the fun part, actually creating our virtual machine. And first things first, what you need to do is upload your ISO images. In order to save some time, I've already done that under Proxmox, local. I have my Windows 11 English x64, which by the way, it is 5.5 gigabytes of data. That's crazy to me. But in addition, we have the VirtIO drivers because with the type of virtual disk and internet drivers we're going to be using, we're going to need some additional drivers. Download link for both of these will be in the description if you are interested. So now let's actually make our virtual machine. So go up here, click on Create VM, and I'm going to call this Win11, and I'm going to leave all this default for now. I do have Advanced selected. Under Operating System for ISO image, we're going to select that Windows 11. Guest OS, change this to Microsoft Windows, and then version is going to be 11.2022. So from there, we could go next to System here. And for machine, Q35 is absolutely perfect. We're going to leave graphic card at default. Under SCSI controller, I am going to change this to SCSI single. OVMF for UEFI BIOS is exactly what we want. Right here under the TPM storage, we're just going to go with our local LVM, same with our EFI storage. and version 2 for TPM is perfect. So from there, let's go ahead and continue to our disks. Bus device, I'm going to change this to SCSI, and basically everything can remain default. I am going to up the storage to 256 gigabytes of storage because I am actually going to end up using this virtual machine quite a bit. So from there, let's go next. This is our CPU. I'm just going to up this to 4 cores for now. This is an 8-core processor I have in here. And everything here seems to look good, so I'm going to continue. This is our RAM, our memory. I'm going to go with 16 gigabytes of RAM, so I'm going to be multiplying this by 4. Going next, and here under network, we are going to want to change this. You could keep everything at default except for the model right here. We're going to want to change to VirtIO. And then from there, let's go next. And here is all of our configuration. Everything looks good to me, so let's go ahead and finish that up. So what we're going to do is go right here under our virtual machine, and then we're going to go to options and just change our boot order real quick so we actually make sure to boot into the proper device. So right here, let's bump this up to the first spot. This is our ISO for Windows 11. Hit OK. And now what we're going to do is some configuration again. So let's jump back into Proxmox under the shell. And I'm going to just copy and paste this command here. This is our actual virtual machine configuration file. So nano etc pve qu or QEMU server. And right there under VMID, you're going to want to change this to the proper ID, and that is 100 for this virtual machine. You can just see it right here next to the name that we gave it. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and we are going to see a lot of stuff here. Now I'm going to paste over everything the guide says. There's one thing that we're going to change or get rid of. So if I go all the way down to the bottom here and paste this on in, we're going to have machine, CPU, and arguments. Now, the one thing we're going to get rid of is machine right here. It says Q35. This machine's already appear as PC Q35 6.2. And that's a Windows 11 specific configuration. And since this guide has been written, Windows 11 came out. So we're just going to get rid of that. But we're going to be keeping the CPU and arguments here. So Control O to output that, enter, Control X to get out of there. And now what we should be able to do is actually add our PCI device to our virtual machine. So if we go over to hardware, add, and we're going to want to add that PCI device. Here we are. And if something went wrong or you don't have something enabled properly, you might get a message here. Just make sure, again, that you've enabled IOMMU properly. But here, if we click device, this is going to look a little familiar. We have our 5 o'clock looking number here, which this is our graphics card, the Radeon RX 580. So I'm going to click on that. And from here, we're going to want to make sure all functions is enabled. Keep ROM bar checked. We're not going to check primary GPU for now, but we are going to check PCIe Express. So let's add that, and then we can see it right there. And again, if you do encounter any issues, I would recommend referring to that guide I have linked in the description. So from there, I do believe we're ready to start our virtual machine. So I'm going to go to start, and we're going to get ready to press a key to get into our boot, well, our Windows installation. So start boot option, press any key. I did press a key. So now we should be jumping into the Windows 11 install. There we go. And I'm going to pop this out so we can see it just a little bit better here. Whoop, bring this on over, and let's just drop it right here for now and go next, install now. And we're just going to run through the normal installation process, but right once we get to the point where we're going to have to pick our hard drive, that is where we are going to have to load in our drivers. So for now, I'm just going to go Windows 11 Pro. Next, I'm going to go ahead and accept these Microsoft terms, custom install. And here you can see it's not showing a device. So what we're actually going to want to do is real quick, go back over to Proxmox and do a little switcheroo here. So under Windows 11, we're going to go to hardware, and right here under CD DVD drive, I'm going to go select that and go edit. And we're just going to quickly swap it out for those VirtIO drivers we inputted. Hit OK. Go back to our virtual machine over here, and we're going to go load driver, browse, and now this CD drive is going to be the proper drivers. So we're going to go VIO SCSI right here. Going to go select Windows 11 and go with the AMD 64. So if I load that, you're going to see the proper red hot VirtIO driver. Let's go next. Now it's going to load in the driver, and when it is done, we're going to have to jump back over here real quick and switch it out. So we can see right there, it's detecting the drive. So let's jump back over to Proxmox and edit this, switch out our disk for our Windows 11 installation, hit OK, jump back over to our virtual machine here, and then select this drive, new, apply, OK, and next. So now we're just running through the basic Windows install. It's going to reboot a couple times. And if it does boot into the installation again for some reason, you're just going to want to go ahead and eject that ISO and reboot your machine. But at this point, I'm just going to run through the normal Windows installation process and meet you back in the Windows desktop. And I will note during the installation process, you're not going to have internet, so you're going to have to continue with the limited setup. And when we get in, we're going to go ahead and install those proper drivers. And speaking of, here we are in our Windows 11 desktop via no VNC. Now, the very first thing we're going to want to do is enable remote desktop, because the steps we're going to do after this will make it so no VNC may not work properly as we switch over from their drivers to our dedicated CPU. So first thing, we're going to go into settings real quick. And under settings, we're going to search for remote desktop settings. Now under here, it's as simple as toggling this on, enabling the remote desktop. So let's confirm that. This is our PC name. And if you want to, go ahead to remote desktop users and just confirm that you already have administrative access, which I do. So now that that's enabled, what we're going to want to do is get our IP address. But before we can do that, we actually need some internet connectivity. And see down here, we have none. So simply like we did earlier, we're going to want to go back to Proxmox. With our CD drive selected, click on Edit, and again, switch this out for those VirtIO drivers. Click OK, go back over to our virtual machine. You can see it, they just popped up there. But what we're going to want to do is go into our device manager. So right here is our internet controller. We're just going to give that a quick right click and update the driver. We are going to browse our computer, and here let's click browse and go to that CD we just popped in. And the drivers we're going to want to pull are in the net KVM folder right here. So give that a click and then go down to Windows 11. So let's select the AMD 64 and click OK. When we hit next, it should look perfectly fine. So we have the Red Hat VirtIO, and we can see we are connecting to internet there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out, exit this out, and now you're going to want to take note of your IP address so we can remote into this in a little bit. So let's open up the good old Windows terminal and then just type in ipconfig like so. And here it's going to give us our local IPv4 address, which for me, it's ending in 48. So I should remember that. So let's close this out. And what I'm going to do is actually close out this no VNC prompt right here. And I'm going to log in with a client. This right here is the RDP client I'm going to be using. I think it's Remapping Remote Desktop Client. It's installed by default in Ubuntu, but this is a good one if you're running on Linux. And give a quick connect here. And yes, let's accept our certificate. So then this is going to override that. And I can switch this over to hardware for now. Now I'm just going to leave this logged in, and under hardware, we're going to go over to display here, click on edit. And for graphic card, we're going to want to select none. Believe it or not, because we're going to, instead of using their drivers and their input, we're going to use our actual dedicated graphics card. And with that, what we're going to want to do is go ahead and stop and start our virtual machine. So let's hit stop. This is going to end it, and we should see it eventually disconnect down here. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start up our virtual machine, and we should still be able to remote into it with having no display drivers set. Awesome. There we go. So I'm going to type in my password, and then I'm going to toggle dynamic update and make this window a little bit bigger so we have a better time here. There we go. And now we're at the point that we could go ahead and install some drivers. Now, before we do that, I'm just going to show you our task manager real quick. Under more details, performance, you can see it is detecting our Radeon RX 580, so it's currently using that, which is a very good sign. So we're going to go ahead and pull some drivers for it. So I went ahead, grabbed some software. This right here is the AMD Pro drivers, because I'm going to be using this with DaVinci Resolve. And DaVinci Resolve is good because out of any application out there, this is the one that will definitely tell you if your GPU is garbage or not. So first thing, we're going to grab these professional drivers. So let's install those. All right, moment of truth, detecting your system configuration for driver and software compatibility. And there we are. So it's detecting it. Let's go ahead and do an install. And now our system's going to restart with those drivers installed. All right, so we are back after our driver installation. If I go ahead and skip this, you can see the software installed completely fine. And if we do go over to settings, we have our various options. And jumping over to performance, we can see it's detecting everything just fine. So I'm going to close this out and let's do the ultimate test. And that is, like I said, installing and opening DaVinci Resolve. All right, so let's agree to this, install, next, install, and finish. Why do we always got to restart every single time? There we are. So let's go ahead and see if this fires up. DaVinci Resolve, first launch, the true litmus test. All right, continue, and when we start the setup, it's gonna let us know. So quick setup, here we go. Operating system good, graphics good. Awesome. So if we continue from there, continue, and continue, we will have DaVinci Resolve. So that's just evidence enough that the GPU pass-through is working perfectly fine. Let's allow access, allow, and here we are in Resolve. Absolutely fantastic. And just like that, we're using a GPU in a virtual machine. Make sure you subscribe to this channel because I'm going to be doing a lot more things with it, as this now is going to be my home lab, replacing a little mini PC that I was previously using for things like my Jellyfin server, a transmission client, things like that. So lots of fun tutorials on the way. If you are looking for more content right now, I do recommend going to the 100 Days of Home Lab website. What I'm going to be doing is linking to that as a pinned comment down below. Lots of cool content creators making similar type videos to this. So check it out down below. And with all that, I do hope you have an absolutely beautiful day and goodbye.